Hey everybody, Ty here. I hope everyone is doing well and the day has almost arrived. We are currently at Friday, October 17th, looking at our threat for tomorrow for severe weather. Now, there have been a lot of changes. We've been kind of going back and forth with things, and I think that will probably even continue into the overnight tonight. I do think I'm going to have an early morning live discussion for this as well. So, we'll see what changes between then and now. But with us now being within that 48-hour time frame, we can actually take a look at our exact hazard types as issued by the National Weather Service and Storm Prediction Center here. So the biggest threat really is going to be our wind and our tornado threat here. The wind threat spans out the entire area of the slight risk here. No hatched risk at this time. I'm kind of thinking this is how things are going to stay. We mentioned that in yesterday's video. The main area of interest I would really say is going to be over towards maybe southern and central parts of Missouri, heading all the way through the entire state of Arkansas. Probably see some early initiation over towards the eastern parts of Oklahoma and Texas as the storm system progresses off to the east. I would say towards the eastern half, towards areas like West Tennessee, northwestern parts of Mississippi here, and also Kentucky, maybe in southern parts of Illinois, are going to be a little bit later into the evening, and probably a little bit more on the isolated side when it comes to severe reports. If you're anywhere in the green, I'm not ruling you guys out any less for severe weather than these guys, but I would think that we're going to see a little bit more in the way of sporadic activity more so than anything else. We'll of course be keeping an eye out and being prepared to live stream during the time in which the event would begin to occur, which I would say really starts at, I would say, lunchtime, maybe 1 or 2 o'clock Central Time. But we'll have to see how things progress with the trough here, because depending on how that ends up progressing will be the big determining factor behind everything. But of course, as we mentioned, we have the wind threat. Here's our tornado threat. This day is mostly confined over towards the Ozarks here. There's going to be a point in which the low-level jet does kick in a little bit more. 5% does seem a little bit excessive to me, just by the slightest amount for some of these areas, mainly due to the fact that as we go into the model data, you'll kind of see it, but the timing in which that low-level jet comes in may be a little bit off as of right now. But if that does end up being variable, this ends up being a good play here, putting up the 5%. But we'll see how this progresses throughout the, like I said, we'll see how this progresses with models and ultimately throughout the day tomorrow. There is a hail threat with this as well, but it stays rather on the minute side. We end up seeing a small opportunity begin to occur over here, but due to poor lapse rates, I would say that this threat's going to stay relatively isolated as well. The further off to the east we progress, the hail threat quickly drops off. So again, here's a look at our trough here at this point. We're using the HRRR at this point because we're into the short range now. Using long range models will work, but I like using the higher resolution model since we have them available. This is our trough, and the reason why I say the progression is going to matter and probably going to be a limiting factor is because what you're looking at right here as this trough begins to develop, there's going to be a little jet max, this area right here, that kind of ends up lagging behind it. If this was more towards the central point of the trough here, towards the axis itself, then I think our severe weather threat would increase, but I think it's lagging just a little bit too far behind to really make much of a difference. Do see something try to pop up over there, and if that would happen earlier in the day, and this is why I still think that we need to watch this closely, if that jet max or jet streak were to pop up a little earlier as well, then we could be talking a different story here, because I do think the parameters that are out ahead of it are still capable of producing maybe prefrontal cells, and maybe there could be a storm that ends up forming early in the day to be able to take advantage of said environment. There is enough forcing with this system as well, as you can see with these contour lines. If I were to go ahead and pause this and we go about 24 hours out, you can see that we do have some short waves beginning to form here by the time we get into the early afternoon hours. And if something were to develop maybe towards the central and southern part of the state, could be a sneaky little tornado threat with this as well. The main line probably starts to enter the state from Oklahoma into Arkansas probably at about 4 o'clock Central Time. So again, it's kind of one of those more touch and go types of forecasts, but depending on if we end up getting this to deepen a little earlier, then we might be looking at something a bit different here. And I mean, like I said, you can kind of see it happening here by the time we get later in the evening, right around the time of sunset. So, like I said, this can sometimes vary about 1 to 2 hours. Typically, we'll see this happen a little bit after sunset, and you can really start to see it deepen as we get into the evening and overnight hours. Hence why we have that severe thunderstorm threat that stretches all the way into both Illinois, Indiana, and also into Tennessee and Kentucky. But, of course, by that point, our parameters are starting to go away. We're losing our instability. We're losing a lot of our cape over towards these areas. And also, low-level jet just isn't really backing this setup enough, really, to have a more pronounced tornado threat a little bit further off towards the north. Now, I mean, there is tomorrow that we still have to watch out for as well, and I will be going over the details with that in tomorrow morning's stream. But from what I'm seeing here, like I said, it's not looking like we're going to have a huge outbreak or anything of the like as of right now. Now, if we end up seeing a model come in overnight that looks absolutely insane, then those words will age like milk. But again, this is kind of just a general rundown of what we're seeing right now. Again, storms seem like they're going to initiate right around lunchtime or a little bit after. So for anyone that's college football fans over here, if you have any games going on, do be leery of the weather, especially over towards eastern Oklahoma. And then as time goes on, got to be watchful over towards Arkansas, parts of Louisiana and Missouri as well. You can see the short waves here where we get those thunderstorms really start to pop off here. And then as we continue to go forward, we'll see this progress off to the east, as we mentioned previously. So let's go ahead now and take it one of the key parameters here. This is our low-level jet. And like I said, there's just not a whole lot of backing, and that's really going to be one of the big limiting factors. By the time this does kick in, a lot of these storms are exiting the area. We're struggling to keep instability, and that's really going to be one of the big throws with this setup. It's just the timing just isn't there. Like I said, as we get into the overnight hours, this kind of deepens, and that's what helps keep this severe weather threat prevalent over towards the Ohio and Tennessee valleys. But in time, with the other parameters starting to go away, it kind of limits things a bit. So as we get later into the evening, I expect that severe weather threat to wane. And then, of course, we mentioned before, looking at our moisture, and this is going to be another interesting factor for the day, is really the moisture content itself. Due to the fact that that jet streak is lagging a little bit, I think it's also going to make for a slightly messier storm mode. And also a little bit of prefrontal activity over here in regards to maybe a weak MCS or just a boundary of showers and storms that develop, which could also make or break the day as well due to the increased amount of cloud cover that we would see from that residual. So another wrinkle, another wild card that we're going to have to really keep an eye on. Now, the other thing about this is if we look at the surface temperatures early in the day, though, we still get some 80s, mid 80s up here, and upper 70s across our primary area of interest. So it does look like the air mass holds up well enough to keep things going, even all the way up towards southern parts of Missouri, where those showers are likely to be expected earlier in the day. That was really going to be one, and that's really going to be one of my key questions: is how much energy will these showers and storms end up taking up? Because the thing is, there is a point where these clouds kind of clear up a little bit before our main event begins to get going. Tends to get going, I should say. And I do wonder if this could be a little bit of a wrinkle in the system right here. And depending on how this destabilizes further, like I said, I can't rule anything out just yet. That's why I'm still intrigued to stream this, because a lot of people are calling this setup slop. And I mean, if you look at it from everything that we're seeing on models, I can agree with that. But there are a couple little, like I said, there's a couple little wrinkles in this in which might be something I end up missing. Because if anyone knows about the Enderlin tornado being rated EF5, yeah, I missed that stream making the move on a play that was similar to this, Wasn't expecting much of it, and then we got an EF5 at 11 o'clock at night. So, yeah, just one of those things, right? So let's go ahead now and take a look at our surface-based cape here. This is going to be our key point of instability. And this is where I think a lot of people end up starting to write this off, because it just doesn't really look like we have a lot of surface instability throughout the day. It really starts to wane as we start to get towards the peak hours of this event, long before that low-level jet kicks in. There are a couple areas that I've observed, however, where the environment still is capable. This will be one area where I'm slightly intrigued, but I'm thinking the timing, once again, doesn't really match up that well over towards southern Arkansas. But if we can manage to increase instability over here with that decrease in cloud cover, if we get something to form out ahead of this, there might be an opportunity here. But again, look at that though. For the instability that we do have available, we're lacking in that low-level jet, because you want to see these hodiographs here begin to curve a bit. And as a result, we end up seeing nothing. We end up really seeing a whole lot of nothing with these soundings as of right now. Here's a good example. You can see that we get a little bit of a linear mode, but not a great big curve in the hodiograph. So it's one thing that's just kind of keeping the event down, per se, in regards to its potential. And I think, again, that has a lot to do in large part with the troughing and ultimately that jetmax lagging a bit, because thermodynamics here are kind of low as well as a result of that lag. If we were to go a little bit further towards the south and a little bit later, where that low-level jet does kick in, let's say over towards parts of southern Arkansas into Louisiana, we have a little bit of a better opportunity for tornadic activity. We have a lower end tornado threat with what's likely to be a higher precipitation supercell, I would say. Maybe leaning a little bit more towards classic. But in either case, though, it looks like we're still kind of fighting a bit of an uphill battle here. Do have a little bit of inhibition coming in to kind of slow things down, but really, again, at this point, the thermodynamics being poor, mainly the lapse rates, are going to be the big inhibiting factor. Plus, by this point, dew points are slightly backed off a bit. We want to see that a little bit closer to our surface temperature over here, which is at 83 degrees. Not saying that we couldn't get a tornado, but it's definitely not going to be your textbook setup. So like I said, there's a lot working against it, but there are also some areas that are looking a little bit better. This is probably one of the best soundings I've seen so far out of all the bunch. This is over towards the Louisiana-Mississippi border. This will be right at about 7 o'clock Central Time. This probably has some of the better parameters. Even then, still, thermals, mainly with the lapse rates, not quite as good. Surface temperature and dew points are a little bit closer, but again, a little bit of inhibition at the surface is slowing things down just a bit. The lower level winds are looking a lot better with this, so I would say at this point, if there's going to be any activity, I would say it's leaning more so towards the south. At one point I was leaning towards it being further north. Now at one point I was thinking central Arkansas. Now we're doing this again, so I'm still forever uncertain as to how things are going to pan out with this event, but I would say at this point, just be ready for anything, because this year has been full of surprises with severe weather, and I wouldn't be surprised if this either does absolutely nothing or drops something absolutely insane. Not to say that we could have a middle of the road kind of day either. So it's going to be one of these frustrating nowcast types of situations, if you ask me truthfully. So let's go ahead now and take a look at some of the northern areas too, because I don't want to leave those areas out either. Again, it's a pretty similar deal as to what we're seeing down here. Just not a lot of instability available across the board. There are a couple areas that I'm interested in, but again, those winds are not really favorable for all hazards of severe weather. We're kind of leaning towards maybe marginal severe. This is probably one of the better soundings that I've clicked on since I've looked over the model data. Of course, this is more of a linear mode. Again, it's pretty much the same old story. Lapse rates kind of lacking, not much in the way of downdraft cape, so I would expect activity up here to be a little bit more on the isolated side as well. But again, wouldn't be surprised to see a few severe thunderstorm warnings a little bit further off towards the north, over towards the Illinois, Indiana line, maybe even sneaking its way into Ohio as we get later into the evening. And then after that point, we really start to see everything kind of drop off by the time we get towards maybe 9, 10 o'clock at night. So, final look at what the radar could look like. We're going to mainly just keep our focus over here. And you can see our storms have already really started to get going by the time we get into lunchtime here, and really kind of peak, I would say, about 2 or 3 o'clock central. We're always going to be keeping an eye out for any sort of discrete cells here that pop up, because those will probably have the best chance of taking advantage of the environment. Like I said, that lack of low level jet and the timing in which it does kick in might come in a little too late. But I would say maybe over towards the southeastern part of the state of Arkansas, maybe even the northeastern parts of Louisiana seem like the most favorable areas. You do see a little bit of prefrontal activity over here. But I'm thinking at this point, if there's going to be any sort of tornadic activity, especially if anything of more significance, it's going to have more to do with these mergers that would occur with these prefrontal cells in this main line that we see here. And then if we were to go ahead and take a look at the wide view here, we're just going to go ahead and cover the other regions as a whole. You can see it's a much messier mode, classic MCS kind of deal. A lot of heavy rain expected over towards the Ohio Valley, Midwestern regions as well. There is a stronger area that does look like it kind of pops up over here as we get into the overnight. But overall, I would expect the threat to be relatively minimal, but the flood threat might start to ramp up as a result of this. And all of this is going to be part of a just overall pattern where we end up seeing an increased amount of storm activity as a whole. So again, we'll be going over that tomorrow morning in more detail. But for right now, this is going to be the end for this video. Appreciate you all being here, and I look forward to discussing the weather with you all again tomorrow and covering it as needed. But everybody take care. Have a wonderful rest of your Friday, and I'll see you next time.